All right. Joining us now here, he has been a busy man. He has talked to like literally just about everybody that's important at UCF. I feel like he's talked to Gus Malzahn, he's talked to Johnny Dawkins, he's talked to Terry Mohajir. I'm a step down clearly now where compared to who he's been talking to. Speaking of Orlando Sentinels, Matt Murschel, who gets a chance to talk to me for a few minutes to talk about these conversations, and certainly he's been rating him for the Orlando Sentinel. You've been busy, man.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. It's either feast or famine sometimes in our business, where you think, man, I'm not getting enough, I'm not doing enough, and then next thing you know, it's like I got interviews stacked up, one by one by one, which is great for me. I mean, I get lots of stuff from these talks, and it helps me out, and especially as we're in the kind of really starting to dive into summertime, and there's a little bit of not much going on, and so it's important to kind of get these opportunities.
Well, and you got to break some news. You broke on Friday that Johnny Dawkins extension with UCF and the details behind that. I know you got a chance to talk to both parties there, Terry Mohajir and Johnny Dawkins. What's your takeaway from that extension with Johnny Dawkins and UCF basketball, which we've been kind of wondering. We assumed there
Yeah.
was an extension. I remember Johnny Dawkins, like they said a month or two, it's being worked on and things like that, but
Yeah.
now it's final, it's public. What was your reaction as you got the details?
Well, yeah. I mean, my reaction was, I think it was inevitable. They mentioned, I think it was in late March, right after the season, that UCF had offered, a contract extension to Johnny and his party, and they were working it out, waiting to see what's going on. This was Johnny's going into his last year. This would have been the last year of his current contract. And no coach wants to go through that, and no AD wants their coach to go through that, because they understand in the world of recruiting that's going to hurt you, because everyone's going to point to that and say, well, there's no stability, there's no continuity, because they haven't given him an extension. What's going on there? So I think Terry Mohajir, the AD, knew that they had to give him an extension. It's a 2-year deal. Keeps it here through the 2026-2027 season. The second year of that 2-year deal is not guaranteed. So it's really kind of a very much a pro UCF deal in a lot of ways, where, they can wait and see what happens. If there's some success there, they can offer another extension. They can kind of find a way to kind of make that work. But this keeps Johnny there for the next 3 years, really gives him an opportunity, to kind of go and recruit, kind of do some things he does. The deal really was to kind of make sure that there's more resources provided to his coaching staff. They were part of the deal that he got was, some of that is adding more to the staff, making sure they get paid. It's just the nature of the business right now. You got to get assistants, you got to get those guys in place. And Johnny himself even said, listen, we've kind of set the ground floor right now in the Big 12 from last year. We got to build on that. We got to keep going. And so to do that, they need those resources, and they need that continuity and stability. I think that's what this really brought to them. And I think everyone on both sides are really happy about it. And I think they're ready to get going and move on to it. I mean, basketball just started kind of the off-season workouts, and I think they've had 3 or 4 already. And, and Johnny said he's excited. He's excited to get going. They're excited to go into year 2, and they feel like they've got a lot of pieces that they can build off of what they did last year.
The sense I got in reading your article about it, and then I wrote a column about it right after that, is that both sides got what they wanted out of this.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they didn't get completely, but I got the sense UCF wanted a flexible deal
Mm-hmm.
with Johnny, and I got a sense that Johnny wanted more resources, more backing and say, hey, if you want me to succeed more, I need more resources. And Terry Mohajir kind of admitted that to you in the article, which I use that quote in my column because I've been kind of fighting, saying that UCF basketball, and this goes back before Terry Mohajir, for years, I felt maybe took basketball for granted because of lack of resources. Football, obviously everybody understands football is so important,
Yeah.
but I always felt that basketball got left behind, and all of a sudden you're in the best conference in the sport, and you're expecting things there. Did you get that sense that both sides got something out of it? And that was kind of how this deal kind of came about, was they met in the middle ground.
Yeah, very much so. I think both sides, I think for UCF, they wanted to make sure, okay, we got some stability, but also it gives us some flexibility. I'm going to say this. I think in general now, moving on, just in college athletics, I think the days of giving a coach a 5, 6, 7 year extension are over. I mean, you're never going to do that. I think what you want to do is you want to do short little extensions. I think you'd like to, that way, then you're not finding yourself kind of handicapped by a big long deal or a buyout that maybe could hurt you in the end if you decide to make a change, or let's say the coach wants to leave. So, I think for UCF, this deal works out perfectly for them. I think for Johnny, it works out because, again, he wants those resources. Those were important to him. He's an established coach. He wants to continue. He loves Orlando. He loves UCF. He told me several times, I love this community. I want to be here. It's not a case of I want to go anywhere else. It's I want to be here and coach here. So I think he was eager to get this deal done. It was just kind of ironing out these details. But you're right. The resources have always been kind of a sticking point in a lot of ways. I mean, we're in the South. College football is king, and everyone spends the money on college football. But eventually, when you move to a conference like the Big 12, which has one of the best basketball programs in the country, some of the best basketball programs in the country, you need to spend some money in your basketball programs to be competitive. And that means, recruiting. That means for charter flights, to get the players back and forth. That means whether you're going to go take, foreign trips, whether you're going to compete in other tournaments sometimes around during the season. So all those things you need to have those resources. And I think that's where this deal kind of gives them a little bit of that. And I'm sure as it goes on, more money will be pumped into that. Terry told me, listen, we've already spent $12 million to upgrade, the arena, to kind of all those areas around there. They want to make sure everything's kind of as top of the line as they can. That'll probably continue to be something they'll continue to work on as soon as they start getting the full revenue share from the Big 12. And again, this is all the focus is just making sure they got all the pieces they need to be successful.
Well, we haven't even brought up NIL. That's another thing wrinkled now into this college athletics landscape that's topsy-turvy. So it's the wild, wild west. But, that's one thing that strikes me, and I'm glad you brought up that Johnny wants to be here. That's, having been around him, that's the thing that blows my mind. This is Johnny Dawkins. He's had a successful college career. He's a Hall of Famer, NBA. But he really enjoys coaching, and he enjoys being here. And I sometimes I kind of like, why do you, he doesn't have to do this, and yet he does want to do this. Does that when it strikes you in talking to him a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, he's very passionate. Obviously, if you sit down with him for any length of time, he talks about the passion. He talks about, wanting to be and teach these kids and really kind of taking this program to that next level. He told me several times, we're nowhere near where we want to be, obviously. My blueprint for where I want this program to be is not there yet. But we feel like we're getting on the right track. We're getting the right type of players. They feel like they're bringing in guys that are really kind of some things that maybe they feel like are going to help them get to where they need to be. I brought this up. I mean, it's very rare anymore for a basketball program to have a player who has been around as long as Darius Johnson. I mean, you just don't see that. Guys come for a year or they come for 2 years and they're gone. And to have a guy like Darius be a centerpiece to this team, I think is important. And it shows also to the connection to Johnny. It's like, hey, I want to be around for Johnny. Jalen Sellers said this at the end of the season. I want to play for only one man, and it's Johnny Dawkins. And that's a huge thing. That's a huge selling point. And Jalen can go out now and talk to some of these other kids in the transfer portal and say, hey, I love this guy. I want to play for this guy. He's doing what I think is right. You should come and play with us too as well. So I think you're right. Johnny doesn't, it's not like he's thinking, you don't see him like looking around, like, where are these other opportunities? Where are these jobs? He's 60 years old. I mean, I think in his mind, this is probably the pinnacle of where he's going to go at this point in his career. And he'd like to stay here as long as he possible.
What, I don't know, his thoughts on year one in the Big 12? Has he reflected on year one in Big 12? What's his thoughts on how year one went in the Big 12? Because you and I know, going into the season, a lot of people were like, oh, it could be doom and gloom, or they're going to win maybe a couple games. And I think they surprised a lot of people. I thought they showed themselves very well. They were in every game, 7 wins. As he's now had reflect on it, what was his thoughts on year one in the Big 12 and how it went?
Yeah, he thought, that they had some successes, obviously. I mean, he said it wasn't exactly how we wanted it to go. Obviously they thought they should have won more games. But one of the messages that he told me was, when I went into last year, my message from the start was we belong. We belong in this conference. He said, I was so worried that these guys were going to think, we were just coming in from the American, that, we were just being there and that was good enough. He said, no, we belong in this conference. We're going to play like it. And I think you saw that from this team. I think you saw that when they played these games, it wasn't like they were getting blown out every other game, or they were, they weren't in any of these games. They were in every game practically last season. And so that was one of the things that he told me he was most proud of, the heart from this team, that they didn't get caught up in the, oh my gosh, we're playing Kansas. Oh my gosh, we're playing, Houston. We're number one team in the country. Oh my gosh, we're playing, it was like they just went out and played. And you kind of saw that payday. You saw, beating Kansas at home, in that early January. That was huge for them, huge for the program. That really kind of got them going. And then you look at going down the road and then beating a couple more ranked teams. And then, Johnny said what he was really proud of is, some of those road victories, that win at Texas, the win late in the season at TCU. Those were games that he's like, we needed those wins. And we could have easily folded because we were struggling a little bit. but boom, they come out and get the win. And then they're able to kind of roll that into, being in the postseason and everything. Yeah, the way it finished wasn't exactly how they wanted for it to end, but he felt like, they were on the right track. They had he thought that the players were doing everything they needed to do. They had some injuries that kind of threw them off at times, but they learned a lot from that first season. But one of the things he stood up to him was the heart of this team and how they were willing to kind of lay it all on the line for each other. And there was not finger pointing and everyone kind of saying we're not doing anything right. He said these guys wanted to play for each other.
And there was the support. Johnny has been talking about the fan support for a while. They had a record attendance, ticket sales. They were in the top 75 in the country in attendance, which was big. I'm wondering if both Johnny and Terry brought that up as well, because that had to give them some confidence too. That look, there is interest there. Certainly the Kansas win I thought was huge from that standpoint because it built that confidence. You were there in the building throughout the year, how loud and what a great home court advantage that could be. And I think people got caught up in Big 12 basketball.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, you like I said, you were there, you saw it. I mean, that Kansas win, I asked Johnny about that game, and he said it was unbelievable. He said, I've been in some great atmospheres. Now think about this. This is Johnny Dawkins, who played at Duke, who, was a Naismith Player of the Year, like had coached at Duke, had been part of some great teams. He said that was probably one of the best environments I've been around. That game, because he said it was just so, you get caught up in the fans storming the court and, him getting involved in all that, the players celebrating. I mean, that's what he wanted to see happen. And he said that was his hope, was when we started, last year, that they were going to be able to draw that kind of crowd, really get everyone involved. And it happened, you saw as it went on. And, I think he felt like that was a big part of why they had success last year. He told me, they felt like the community, the crowd, everyone was getting behind it. They were embracing Big 12 basketball, probably embracing basketball really here for the first time in a while, and he said they really just kind of started, you could feel it in the community. And that was something that I think it really kind of touched him. Like, yeah, this is what we can do. And, we were at some post games, Eric, you and I, where you talked to opposing coaches and they were saying, this is some of the best environment we've played in this year. You know what I mean? And they were like blown away by that. And I asked Johnny about that. He said, that means a lot to me personally, that other coaches said that, because that's what we're trying to do. We want to make it tough for you to win here in our house. And that's something that they were able to do throughout the season.
Yeah, I agree. That's what really, these coaches have played in these hostile environments. Fog Allen, you've played at the Doom, and they're like, yeah, this place was tough. And I think the Big 12 coaches were surprised. They probably thought going into the season, we're going to go down to Orlando. That'll be an easy game. And it was far from it. And I definitely don't believe they expected the atmosphere, because why would they? It wasn't like this ever during the American, unless like 2019, for example, when UCF made the push to the tournament. They sold out senior night with Cincinnati and things, but that was far, between it. Most of the time, it was maybe half filled at best. But clearly, the Big 12 and the brand helped bring people into the building, the casual people, and they kept following them.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the brand helped them, getting a Kansas, getting some ranked teams. I was looking at the schedule. I remember last year when we were covering the games, and I remember thinking, look at the schedule. You're facing like 3 or 4 ranked teams in a row at some point, and you're like, when's the last time UCF had that, ability to say, we're going to bring in 3 or 4 ranked teams in a week, in a month, let alone a whole season. And then boom, you have these teams come in here and, I think that was the drawing for a lot of fans is, oh, wow, Kansas is here. And like you said, beating Kansas was huge. I think that really kind of set the tone. Fans got into it. You got the palm fronds. Everyone was doing that. That really kind of started things. And then I think people just kind of carried over. And I think there were opportunities. If they won a couple more games during the season, I think that maybe it could have even been better. I think they averaged over 7,000 fans. I think I looked up around my story from home games, and that was great for them. And I think Johnny thinks they're going to do better again this year. Again, if they have a great start and a great, good, you're going to see a lot of fans. They got 4 new teams coming in. You're going to get an Arizona, which is probably going to be ranked high. You're going to get, you got Arizona State, you got Colorado. There's going to be some big name teams that are going to come in as well.
Arizona's another big brand. And the conference is going to 20 conference games, which is going to be wild. And I believe UCF's going to host Texas A&M in non-conference to start an NCAA tournament team, which will probably help the non-conference attendance, because the non-conference attendance takes a hit, especially during football season. But A&M, that could be a packed house for the Aggies when they come in. You talked to Terry Mohajir. What was his thoughts on the Big 12 year one himself? Did that subject come around with him? And what does he think of how year one went overall for UCF as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, he thought it was successful. I mean, again, for the first year, Terry has a unique perspective because he was actually a coach in the Big 12. At the football level, he was an administrator of the Big 12. So he understood exactly kind of what to expect. So it wasn't like he came into that year thinking, okay, I have no idea what's going to happen. They had an idea kind of what was going on, but to see the success on the field, to see football get to where it had gotten to see basketball get to a postseason, to see baseball get to the NCAA tournament, to see softball get to the NCAA tournament. I mean, he went on and on. I mean, attendance figures going up, ticket sales going. I mean, it was just, Terry told me it was great to see. I mean, they hit all these marks, that they didn't think they were going to be able. I mean, it just happened because people really were caught up in this idea of, it's being in a Power Five conference, and I think that it went well. Now would they like to see, obviously you want to see more success. You'd love to see things happen. They want to see some of their other programs that maybe struggle a little bit, women's basketball and things like that, where they'd love to see them get better. But even Terry told me, we understand for some of these programs it's going to be a climb. I mean, women's basketball had a coaching change, and Satia's still trying to bring in her own recruits and refilling that roster, and that takes time. So, but Terry said everywhere else, I mean, you're seeing the success, and even then you see people and how excited they were, and so he felt like they really reached. It went well for them, and he could see it going better. I mean, they feel like they're in a good spot right now, and that they kind of made their presence known. And I think they're only one of two schools that had three of the revenue generating sports get into the postseason. So I mean, that's something that I think they're going to hang their hat on, and definitely the only one of the new four newcomers to come in that did that. So I mean,
Yeah.
that's something that they're really excited about, and feel like that was a big plus for them.
Well, that was my takeaway. You mentioned football. Obviously, the attendance went up. Season tickets up again this year. Men's basketball we've discussed.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I went to volleyball. Volleyball doubled their attendance this year. They
Yeah.
got to host Texas, who won the national title in volleyball. Softball, you were at the Texas game there. You saw
Yeah.
how packed it was. They sold out the Texas series. They sold out Oklahoma series. They had the most sellouts. And softball, it's weird how they do it. Sometimes it's official sellouts. It's not official sellouts. But
Yeah.
they had more quote unquote what would have been considered sellouts this year than they had in their history of the program. Baseball, you mentioned the success under Rich Wallace in year one. I think that was the thing that I think everybody got caught up in a lot of that. Was there anything Terry mentioned that he took away from a learning experience from year that he didn't know going in that maybe he's going to think into year two and beyond overall? I think that they caught him off guard.
No, not really. I mean, I think travel was
Yeah.
obviously something that, I mean, football especially really hit it. You got hit hard with travel the first year. So they had to kind of figure that out. But otherwise, he said, he's had his thought in his head. This is what it was going to kind of be like. And he said it fell kind of in those parameters. He didn't feel like anything surprised him too much when it came to that. He said he was excited. He was excited that, the donors, boosters, people were giving still. People were excited because of being in the Big 12. You can see the excitement, and they were giving. The donations went up, and you saw it in the NIL factor. For the Kingdom. Kingdom started getting more and more because I think people were seeing the opportunities there as well, and so I think he was real excited on this idea of, okay, let's see what we can do now. And he actually told me, he said, listen, if we get when we start getting that full share of revenue from the Big 12, then things are going to change, because you can spend more money, you can invest more in some of these resources, you could do some things that maybe you couldn't do in the past, because you didn't have that. So I think he feels like, yeah, the future is going to be really bright for them, even with other things going on in college athletics with the House settlement, things like that. He still feels like that they're on a good path and everything's going really well.
Well, that's good to hear on that part, especially what you mentioned with the House. I mean, that's a whole other can of worms there. You spoke to Gus Malzahn as well. How's Gus? What was his kind of tone as you got to talk to him as leading up here now a couple months before the start of the season here, year two in the Big 12 for him?
I think he was excited. I mean, he admitted, listen, he's already said this. He was disappointed how they finished last year, how the season went. Felt like they could have done better. I mean, he admits, that they needed to make some changes. Like he, as soon as the season got over, he told me it wasn't even before the season got done. He realized we got to make some changes. He said when they went into last season, they thought it was going to be more of a passing league. It turned out to be more of a running league, as we saw. He said I knew we were going to have to make some changes. So he was in his mind preparing for that. And when the season got over with, that was the first thing they did when they evaluated was, okay, we got to make some changes with the coaching staff. And he brought in Ted Roof to be his new defensive coordinator, a guy he's very familiar with, a guy that he coached with, won a national title with at Auburn. Went out and got Tim Harris Jr., brought him back in, said, okay, you're going to be the offensive coordinator. He took the reins over running the offense. Gus did, told me, listen, I'm calling the plays now. There's no more, going back and forth. It's going to be me. Tim's going to help him out as well. And, said, that basically in the offseason, they looked at the transfer portal and said, we're going to have to get bigger, stronger, and faster. And so in the portal, they started getting guys that they felt like could fill a lot of those needs. They brought in a new strength and conditioning coach, and Anthony Kinsey. They feel like he's done a great job getting them bigger and stronger. The players that remained, they worked really hard. Gus said several times to me, we had schools coming after some of our best guys, and these guys stayed here at UCF. And that says a lot, because he said we had guys, our top guys, we had schools coming after them. And so he said they decided to stay here. So that was huge for them. And so I think altogether, he feels like they're in a good spot. He feels like the class that they brought in, recruiting wise, is going to be huge. And he feels like the transfers are really going to be a big benefit for them, led by KJ Jefferson, obviously, going into next season.
Why did he feel that him taking back the play calling? Why was that, you felt for him, was that important? Did he kind of share that at all, of the behind that a little bit? Because some people were caught off guard, because he had mentioned before, hey, I can't do the play call. I got to be more of a CEO, the landscape. But then he takes it back, and he admitted that at the end of the year in the presser, like, hey, I just need to be calling. Did he kind of share more in details and behind the thinking there?
More because I think, he thought that, he could let play calling go, in a way, and let some other people run it. And I think as a typical coach fashion, he wasn't happy with the way things were going. And he didn't feel like that was his team. He felt like he needed to take more ownership in it again. And, I think, I think that was one of the reasons why he said, I'm going to do this again. His plan really from the start was to do that. But NIL comes in, he has to take a bigger presence than that. You have to do a lot more with helping with the defense, not just the offense, but helping with the defense as well. And then let's not forget, his wife got sick. His wife had been ill, and really close. Like he told me, she was really in bad shape. And so, I think that was part of that thinking as well. And so then he said, everything, started to work itself out, and he felt like I could do what I need to do and don't have to split up my time as much. And he said, I'm going to take back the play calling. This is who I am. I'm a play caller. And so that's why he went ahead and did that. And that's kind of why he shifted the staff the way he did. Like Darren Hinshaw moves into more being the quarterback's coach, and Tim comes in. And he said, I respect Tim. Tim knows what I want to call, how we're going to call. And he's like, he's going to help give me some advice, but the play calling is going to be me 100%.
Yeah. One of the things that kind of stood out to me in your conversation with him when you wrote about it was the fact that he kind of told you that it feels like they're almost playing a different conference again this year because of the schedule, the way it played out. They're playing all the new members, basically. Yeah. Colorado, they're playing Arizona, they're playing Arizona State, they're playing Utah, plus they're playing BYU, who didn't play last year. So it's kind of unique in that even though you're in year 2 of the conference, it feels like a year 1 because you're playing all these different teams you didn't play last year.
Yeah, that's what Gus said. He joked about it. He said, it's like playing another league again. It's like being in another league because all of a sudden you're playing, these 4 teams from the Pac-12 that you hadn't faced, and now you're going to face them. He said, we only played Cincinnati and West Virginia, I think, were the only 2 schools on the schedule that they played last year. And he said, normally that's not the case. Normally you get 4 or 5 schools that you played the previous year, and then you get some other maybe new schools that rotate in or other schools that rotate in. He said, so it's going to be interesting, and those schools coming in are quite the, they're going to be interesting to see. Utah's won the Pac-12 title several years, under Kyle Willingham. So it's not like this is a program that's anywhere near being, at the bottom of the barrel. They're a top program. Colorado brings in Deion Sanders. There's a lot of buzz surrounding that. Obviously, they sold that game out this week. Lots of attention being paid there. Arizona had a great year last year. I know their coach left and they lost some players, but they're expected to be pretty high up in the Big 12 next year. And then Arizona State, you go on the road to Arizona State, and it's going to be a challenge to go to Tempe and take on this team. So, Gus said it's going to be interesting to see how this year goes. The only thing he said he was really happy about the most was we're not traveling as much. He said last year, he had said that last year really hurt us. He said it really kicked us. And he said this year, we don't have to travel as much. They leave the state once in the first 5 or 6 weeks of the season. So he said that's going to help us out a lot down the road. Whereas last year he said I think we were worn down. I mean you could see I think it's some late they got beat up by that trip. Going to Boise State in the week 2, I think they would have loved to have gotten out of that deal, not have to do that,
Right.
because I think that really kind of set them back a little bit. And then they had some of their moments at the Big 12.
Set them back from a travel and from a health standpoint. That was the game where Plumlee
Yeah,
got hurt and
Plumlee
had
got
missed
hurt.
time. Which
Exactly. And those guys were kind of tired. I mean, it was a long trip coming back, and they felt like, again, to have that and then to get into the Big 12 schedule, it just, guys just eventually got worn down.
you mentioned scheduling. You just wrote about this, about the difference now for UCF from a scheduling deal as a power school versus what they were prior. It used to be UCF would take some games, get some money out of it to play, but now it's the opposite. They're trying to fill up their schedule. Kind of tell us a little bit, because I thought that was an interesting article and kind of an interesting move where UCF now's got to spend money to fill out their home slates, which is what they want. I don't know if they would admit it, but they would want as many home. I mean, it's obvious. They want as many home games as possible, maybe 7 home games a year at max. But it costs money to do that.
Yeah, it does. It's funny because, a couple of years ago, UCF would have been the school that, the Michigans and the Alabamas and everyone would have scheduled and given you that big $1 million contract to come play. And when they were in the Conference USA and Mid-American Conference, and now, they're in the Power 5, they're in the Power 4, I guess now. They're in the Power 4, so they have to kind of find out how to fill their schedule. And Terry Mohajir talked about this. When he arrived in 2021, they had 8 spots over the next 5 years, non-conference spots they had to fill. He inherited a horrible future football schedule. And he told me, he said, listen, I had to get games right away. They had to get a non-conference game for 2021 when he got there. I mean, they didn't have 4 games. So he had to figure that out. So to do that, they had to make these deals. And some of these deals require you spending a little bit of money to secure these guys. And it's not unheard of. UCF paid $1 million to get UConn to come to play. I think it was the year before that, or maybe the year before that, where they came into play. They paid $1 million to that. To get Kent State, Terry told me they spent $900,000 to get them to come in. So you have to spend some of this money. And now that you're a power conference, some of the group of 5 want to play you, but they want to get paid for it. And so they've got 4 games over the next 5 or 6 years that are $1 million plus games. I mean, like Jacksonville State next year is a $1 million guarantee game. Louisiana is a $1.3 million game. James Madison in 2029 is a $1.3 million game. So they've got these big high ticket games that they have to kind of pay for. And Terry told me, this is the price of a business. This is how it's kind of worked. You know what I mean? And you're right. He wants home games. So what he told me is, listen, we're going to get a home and home with a Power 4 school, Pitt, Northwestern. You're going to get those home and homes. Florida is a 2-for-1, basically, and that's how they're going to do it. But, he told me it's not financially good for us to do home and homes with group of 5 schools or FCS. You're never going to do an FCS, but a group of 5 school, it's not beneficial to do home and homes. I mean, because on the back end of it, it cost us money. So he said, we're really not looking to do that. And that was an interesting thing that we talked about, because I asked him about USF. I said, would you ever consider, renewing your rivalry with USF? And he said, well, we want to at some point. He said, we thought about it, but, problem was both schools didn't have a schedule that would work out. USF's schedule was booked all the way through 2030. And he said, and they're not willing to move anything, and we're not willing to move anything. And then he said, but here's the deal, because they're a group of 5, he's like, it's not advantageous for us to book a home and home. He's like, if they want to come here and play a one-off home game in Orlando, he's like, that's fine. We'll schedule that. But we're probably not going to do a home and home. So that pretty much tells me I really doubt that USF probably is going to want to do just a one-off at UCF. So I think that's probably going to be, especially if they're building a new stadium and opening a new stadium in 2027. So that was an interesting kind of tidbit that Terry kind of dropped.
It is interesting, right? Because UCF was on the other side of it. They were like, why are these teams play us? And why don't they do a home and home? But now that you're wearing these shoes, you kind of understand, this is why. Because there is a business side to this. From the standpoint, it's really not that beneficial, and it doesn't benefit you as well on the field. Because in that scenario, I'm sure Florida. I mean, it's kind of interesting with Strickland. He was quoted publicly about, had they known, it was interesting. He said about UCF, had they known certain things, maybe they would have done things differently with UCF as far as scheduling that game. Yeah. But you're right, especially now that you're in a power conference, it's a whole different ball game and philosophy as far as scheduling from a financial standpoint as well as on the field standpoint.
Yeah, and Terry said, their kind of philosophy is, when they got to the Big 12 was, okay, we have 9 conference games, so it leaves us 3 spots. And he said, we have to have 1 spot for a Power conference opponent. That's kind of what the Big 12 mandates. He said that leaves you 2 spots. He said, so that leaves us either group of 5 school and an FCS school. That's kind of his blueprint. That's what he wants to do every year, because he said, listen, I don't want to schedule more than one Power 4. I mean, that would give us, we already give us 10. He's like, all of a sudden we're gonna get to 11. He's like, no, we're not going to do that. We want to have an opportunity, So that's why they schedule kind of the way they do. And so far it's worked out for them. They're scheduled out through 2028 now. They've got some spots coming in after that. But I think too, also a lot of schools, especially a couple of years ago, scheduled out way in advance. They remember, you heard these deals where schools would announce some series and it would be for up to 2035 or something like that. And Terry said some of that's going to change. Again, this is not what he was referring to, but look at the SEC. If the SEC does someday decide to go to a 9-conference schedule, which they've talked about, they're going to have to change how they do scheduling.
Sure.
That's going to open up some windows as well for some schools, I think, and you're going to see some schools with maybe some more opportunities. Maybe UCF will take advantage of that.
Well, now you got the playoff now to 12 teams as of now. Who knows if that increases, and that has to have an impact too on your scheduling philosophies as well, because you want to, there's obviously the automatic bid if you win the conference, but you also want to have a resume that's good enough and to get yourself to the postseason as well. I'm sure that's another wrinkle into all this.
Yeah, exactly. And you want to be able to get your team, the 12-team playoff does allow a team probably to get in with two losses, which you couldn't do in the 4-team playoff. But still, you don't want one of those losses to be so early on in the schedule that you're like, oh man, you're kind of finding behind. You want to be able to give your schedule a little bit of a boost, but also give your team a little bit of a rest. That you look at this season with, for instance, for UCF, New Hampshire is a great way to start. You get Sam Houston, and then you go on the road to TCU. So that gives you an opportunity to get a couple of games under your belt before you go on and have to face open up your conference schedule.
You have obviously your pulse on the national landscape. You cover the national landscape, so you have a pretty good idea what everybody's thinking there. What's been interesting to me so far, it's early. I mean, we're not even in July yet, but some of the outlets out there are kind of like, the national media seems to be a little kind of like wait and see on UCF. A lot of middle of the pack predictions and, hey, they're pretty good. Whereas I get a sense that people inside the program really like this team a lot and locally. So it's kind of that maybe that's expected to be that way. But where do you feel that the national landscape is on UCF football going into this year? Where do you think they feel about where UCF football fits and where they're at in the Big 12?
I think you're right. I think most have, that I've talked to or seen, most have UCF kind of in the middle of the pack. They're not sure, especially with bringing in 4 newcomers from the Pac-12. It's not sure exactly where UCF's at. But you also have a lot of people who've talked about this is a surprise team. This is a team they think can surprise people. And I kind of feel that way too. I think this is a team that's better than the middle of the pack. I would put them higher up than that. I think they can contend for the Big 12 if things go right. There are going to be some challenging games. I mentioned Utah. Utah at home on Black Friday, it's an outstanding game, but it's a challenging game because Utah is a good team. They're not just some bad team. I think, going to Iowa State could be a challenge. Even though Iowa State wasn't great last year, I think, always being on the road is a tough one. West Virginia is a tough place to win at. I think, and they go on the road for that. So there's some games in Arizona was another one. And so I think there's some games that they're going to have to kind of see if they start out really well. But this is a team that I think could start out really well. And if they start out really well, I think they can gain a lot of momentum and be right there as well. I don't see why they couldn't start out, 4-0, 5-0 when they get down to it. If they stay healthy, especially because they've got the pieces there. I think they've got some depth there. I think Ted Roof's going to be a better addition in the defensive, the defensive coaching landscape for them and help them out as well. So I think they've done some of those things they're doing. But nationally, I don't think anyone's like looking around going, well, UCF's going to be a top 25 team going into next year. And I'm not sure if they are going into the year.
Sure.
But I think there could be opportunities to prove themselves to that because, again, they've got lots of chances with some of these teams.
Yeah, I get a sense it's a wait-and-see approach from the national media because, for example, Utah's earned that respect where the people like Utah because of what Kyle Whittingham has done over there. Colorado's a polarizing team, so that obviously is going to be talked about depending on who you ask, what people think about them. Arizona's coming off a great year. Yeah, I feel like UCF, some people like them, but it's like, yeah, but let's wait and see. We don't want to, it's kind of fascinating to me on that regard from a national standpoint, and maybe part of that is the scheduling a little bit. Like the Florida game. I think that's a game that some national people are kind of wondering about as well from both sides, how UCF matches up with Florida. Of course, Billy Napier is going to be much talked about and his
Yeah.
status there at Florida. That's a monster game, I think, for both sides when we get to October in Gainesville.
Oh, for sure. And all everyone's talking about that game is Florida can't lose that game.
Yeah.
Florida can't lose that game. No one's talking about, well, if UCF wins that game, what
Yes.
does that say about UCF now?
Yes.
As
Yes.
a power program, because you beat Florida at their home. You know what I mean? Not at a neutral site like you did in the Gasparilla Bowl. You beat them at their home. I think that's huge. I mean, I think that says a lot about it. And like I just said, if UCF is 4-0 going into that game and they beat Florida and they go 5-0, I mean, you've got to start looking around going, okay, well, this is a good team. This is
Yeah.
a team that can compete for the title. So it's not like, okay. But I was talking to someone the other day. I said, but even if they lose that game, I don't think UCF could put their head down and go, well, oh man, the season's over. I think they say, okay, yeah, we got to find a way to bounce back from that. Because again, you're seeing what Florida's like a 6-point favorite, early favorite in that game. I mean, I thought that was like, I was like, really, or that early? I mean, but still, I think there's plenty of opportunities for UCF to make some hay with that. And I mean, look at the TCU game. It's a Fox game on prime time. That's huge for UCF. They beat TCU on the road in front of a national audience on Fox. That's huge for them. They get another Fox game at the end of the year with Utah. That's another one. You beat that. I think they're going to have another national televised game in prime time at some point down the road. And that Florida game is going to be at least between the 6 and 8 hour, 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock in the evening. And it's going to be it may be on SEC Network or ESPN. So, I mean, big, kind of venues for them to kind of showcase themselves. So I think there's opportunities really to make a big statement for this.
Well, and Colorado's going to be a big draw. It's already sold out. You got the Deion Sanders factor coming back to his state where he made a name for himself. I'm sure that's going to get a good TV slot as well in a matchup there with KJ Jefferson and Shakur Sanders. I mean, that's going to have a lot of buzz.
Yeah, very much so. And I mean, that could be a night game, primetime game, depending on what happens. So, I mean, yeah, there's a lot. I mean, I think you're going to see from this team that I think people are going to be like, okay, but I get it, because when you have transfers coming in, you have different guys coming in, you got RJ Harvey, and everyone's like, okay, he's, but they don't know what to expect from KJ Jefferson. Well, I think KJ's going to thrive in this offense. I think this fits him really what he wants to do. I think last season was kind of like he was in an offense he didn't want to be in and it didn't work for him. And this year he's in one. I think it's going to work for him. I mean, I said this to someone the other day. RJ Harvey's there and you bring in Petty Boone, a guy who rushed for over 1,400 yards. When's the last time you've had a team with two guys who rushed for over 1,400 yards apiece? I mean, and Gus told me flat out, I asked him, are you going to rotate? How are you going to use those two guys? He said, hey, we've used two tailback backfields before. He said, I'm not saying we're going to do that. He said, but we've done it before. And we're going to find ways to get these guys on the field and utilize them as well. So they've got some really good talent that I think is going to really surprise some people, maybe outside of the state of Florida.
Last thing before we let you go, what's one thing you're looking forward to is once they start practice before the season, what's one or two things you're looking forward to either finding out about or learning more about either this football team or just in general with UCF going into year 2 in all sports Big 12? What's some things that you're looking forward to finding out here in year 2?
Well, I think for football, it's just how much change was there. I mean, Gus talked about having to make these changes, having to adapt, having to get better. I mean, they looked somewhat okay in spring. I mean, we didn't get much of a chance to see kind of what that is, but I want to see if we saw some players look bigger, stronger, faster. We saw RJ Harvey, his body was just sculpted. I mean, he looked so much better going through that weight. So I want to see that from those other players. I think will showcase some of that as well for the football side of things. I think in general, I think it's year 2. There shouldn't be any caught up in the bright lights. Okay, you've been in the Big 12. Now it's what can you do from here? Rich Wallace, for instance, in baseball, knows what he's going to get, going into there. So he figures, okay, I got to go recruit and get guys that are going to help me in some of these areas. Every coach really kind of has that now. I know what to expect now. I can recruit to figure out what's going to happen there. And so I think that's where I'm excited to see from year 2 from a lot of the programs is just, okay, now you've been there. Now you can take that next step. What do you need to do to kind of build off of what you learn from that? I think everyone's going to have a different philosophy when it comes to that. Some people are going to attack the portal really hard. Some people are going to, hit recruiting really hard and see what they can do. So it's going to be interesting to see how that adapts.
And I know that's a subject that you're working on for a future article. So we're gonna look forward to that. What else are you working? I mean, you don't stop. You ever take a vacation? You're gonna take a vacation? Like, what else you got? Tell the audience what else you got working on Orlando Sentinel there.
Yeah, I got a story that's gonna come out in a couple days, probably. We talked about a little bit with Terry. I asked Terry about first year in the Big 12. Got some ideas what they thought about how the Big 12 is going. Just talking about where some of the accomplishments they were able to do in year one of the Big 12. I've got a story on Johnny talking about their transfer class. Who they brought in 6 guys. What was your focus on this class? We talked about that. What does he think these guys are going to be able to do? You got a 7'2" freshman coming in. What is he going to be able to do? What I mean? And what he sees that. I got another story looking at UCF. How does UCF approach this whole house settlement thing?
Yeah.
No one wonders, how are they going to be able to handle this? What's going to happen financially? Terry and I talked about that, kind of the in and outs a little bit of some of the things going on there. We talked a little bit about and how do you advertising on the football field? Will he sell more advertising on the football field? Will we see patches on jerseys? What is it you need to do to make extra money? So those are just some of the things I'm kind of working on in the future.
It's a lot, man. Well, keep up the great work. I always enjoy your articles, man. Great to catch up with you. I'll see you in person before you know it. We'll be there at a practice before a football opener. But thanks for taking the time to talk to me, and keep up the great work coverage there at UCF.
No problem. Thank you. It was good seeing you. I'm sure we'll see each other real soon.
Trust me, once I get over the layover of softball season being done, I will be out and about there. Matt Murschel, the Orlando Sentinel, joining us here on Night Shift.